Hi, I'm Vivian from Cheng Cheng Films. Today we have Sean Gilman here to have a little chat with us. Sean is a film critic. He is the editor and founder of Seattle Screen Scene. He has his own website called The End of Cinema, and he writes for various movie publications like MUBI Notebook, In Review Online, and Movie Mezzanine. So we all love Sean's reviews on Chinese language cinema at Cheng Cheng. So we invite him today to talk with us about Chinese cinema. So yeah, Sean, we're really glad that you're here.
Thank you for asking me. I'm honored.
Great. So we'll see if distributors can be friends with film critics today. Cool. So you seem to particularly like Chinese cinema. In your list of top 20 films of the past decade, seven of them are Chinese cinema, and Spring in a Small Town is your top one of all times. How did you become interested in Chinese cinema?
It was kind of a long process. Like I had never heard of a Chinese film, never seen any Chinese films until Quentin Tarantino at the MTV Movie Awards in like 1995 gave a Lifetime Achievement Award to Jackie Chan. And then a few months later, Rumble in the Bronx came out and played at a theater. And that was the first Chinese movie I ever saw. And it was set in the US and shot in Canada and dubbed in English, but it was Jackie Chan and it was really cool. And after that, there weren't a lot of Chinese movies available where I was growing up. Then when I moved to Seattle, I watched some of like the John Woo, Ringo Lam classics with like Chow Yun Fat and the Jet Li movies that we could find. You know, a lot of them, like Once Upon a Time in China, I couldn't get at even Scarecrow Video, which was like this amazing video store in Seattle. The only copy of Once Upon a Time in China they had was unsubtitled on VHS, so you could rent it, and it had like a little disclaimer on it, like you can rent this, but it's doesn't have subtitles, it's not dubbed in English, but we think it looks really cool, so you'll like it if you rent it. It did look really cool, but I had no idea what was going on. So that was kind of like where I was at with Chinese films for a long time. Mm-hmm. Just kind of picking them up here or there, but not really diving deeply into it until about 2013. Some friends of mine were doing a podcast on Johnny To. So I decided to watch as many Johnny To movies as I could. So I would go to this video store and they had pretty much all of his Milky Way Image movies on DVD. So I was able to watch them all. And at that point, I just got hooked, and I had to keep watching more and more because I found him so interesting. I wanted to know who influenced him, who was influenced by him, what the larger culture that his movies were about beyond just like the obvious, the fact that they're really funny or the action scenes are really well staged and things like that. So from there, it just kind of grew into like this big like multi-year project where I've now seen like hundreds of Chinese movies, and I'm just trying to absorb as much of it as I can.
That's great. So you really started with Hong Kong cinema. How does this interest like spread into mainland China cinema and Taiwan cinema?
Well, I had heard a bit about Hou Xiaoxian, but never seen any of his movies until like early 2000s or so. I saw Millennium Mambo, and it was around the same time Edward Yang died, and I watched Yi Yi. Those guys were great, and eventually I did like the same kind of things, just tracked down as many movies as I could and just watched them all. And then going into like regular Chinese cinema, kind of starts with Jia Zhengke and Zheng Yimou and Chen Kaige, and kind of move back to Shanghai, which is like this big project that's like looming over my head that I really want to dive into Shanghai cinema. It's all kind of interconnected and kind of separate. So I don't think you can really understand Hong Kong cinema without understanding mainland cinema, and vice versa, because they're so, especially at this point, they're so intertwined. Like Wong Kar-wai is making movies that are about being somebody from Shanghai living in Hong Kong. So it's kind of essential to know what Shanghai culture is like and how that's transplanted into Hong Kong. And so, it all ties together.
So how long have you been writing Chinese cinema?
Mostly since 2013, since that initial like kind of Johnny To project. And then that summer, I just randomly rented Sammo Hung's Eastern Condors. And it's the first Sammo Hung movie I'd ever seen. And I was just like blown away by not just like the action, but just how weird the movie is in its relation to to Vietnam and Cambodia, and it's Hang Nor, the guy who won the supporting actor Oscar for The Killing Fields, the actual Cambodian refugee, is in Eastern CONDORS playing a Cambodian refugee. It's a very strange movie, and I was so intrigued by it. I spent that summer watching Sammo Hung movies, and I branched out from there to other Chinese movies. From then on, it just became an ongoing project where I'm just constantly watching Chinese movies.
So when you review a Chinese film, what perspectives do you usually focus on? Like subject matter, aesthetics, and culture.
I mean, it depends on the movie, but I try to touch on all of those things because they're all important. They're all essential parts of the movie. Like when I'm writing about Chinese films, what I found in reading about them is most of the criticism on Hong Kong films, especially, is either about them as genre films, like horror movies, action movies, or it's about them as kind of festival auteur films, and it's one or the other. So the festival auteur films are critiquing the films in like the political context or formal elements and how they're relating to mostly European stylistic predecessors. Like Edward Yang will get compared to Michelangelo Antonioni, whether or not his films have anything to do with Antonioni. Whereas like John Woo's films will be criticized from the perspective of like their gunfights and blood and the chaos and all of that. What I tried to do is look for like the genre elements in the art house films and the art house elements in the genre films to try and get a more full picture of what the movies are doing. So a filmmaker like Johnny To is really great at that because his films all have sophisticated genre elements, whether they're his romantic comedies or his action films, but they're also really interesting formally and also in the way that they comment on like the politics of Hong Kong and its relation to China and capitalism and all kinds of other things.
So I read a lot of your reviews on Chinese films. So it seems like you not only know about cinema, the films themselves, you only know about what happened in China nowadays or in the past, like major social events and Chinese pop culture. In your review on Soulmate, you mentioned pop music in the film. How did you know these things in China?
I have a fairly good memory. A lot of it is just reading about China and about Chinese films, and it's just picking up stuff along the way. Like I like Fei Wong's performance in Chungking Express or Chinese Odyssey 2002, and so I'll look for Fei Wong music on the internet and I'll listen to it, and I like Fei Wong's music even though I don't understand any of the words. So I think it's Soulmate uses a Fei Wong song, and I'm like, hey, I know that song. That's a Fei Wong song.
So you know about Fei Wong like before Soulmates?
Yeah. In Ashes Purest White, and actually in all of Zhao Zhenko's films, he uses music in really interesting ways. Like he uses the Wang Fei Hung theme in Ashes Purest White, or the Salier song that's the theme from The Killer he uses, and I recognize those songs, and so stuff like that I will actually research. Other stuff is just stuff I remember I just picked up along the way.
So you not only write about Chinese films, you also write about all other films. So do you find learning Chinese films are different from learning other films?
It's different because I'm not Chinese. I don't know Chinese. I've never been to China or anywhere. So for me, it's a much more different culture to kind of come in and learn than it is, say, like British films or Canadian films. Is something I would be much more familiar with. But I mean, it's not any more, unusual than like Italian films or Spanish films or South American films. We tend to box films by the nationality that they come from. But if you talk to the actual filmmakers, most of them are not just watching movies from their home country. They're watching movies from all over. Ho Xiaoshen, when he went into film school, wasn't just watching Taiwanese films or Chinese films. He was watching films from Europe. He combined the stuff that he saw there with his own sensibility and his own culture. So when I'm like trying to write about them, there's things that I won't know about Taiwanese culture, about language, about history, about all of that, and I can't really worry about that. I just have to write things as I see it while I'm still trying to learn about the culture that I'm writing about. Does that make sense?
That's very interesting. Like your answer brings to another question we have here. So, do you view Chinese movies as an integrated part of the world cinema or a more singular, distinct branch in the world of cinema? Like, do they have their unique characteristics, or do you think they are impacted by the Western?
I think they're impacted by Western cinema, but they're also wholly their own thing. It's not a closed system. All Chinese films, like even during like the 50s and 60s, during the Cultural Revolution, even then Chinese films are still influenced by European and American cinema. It's just the nature of cinema. It's a global art form. There are distinct traditions in Chinese film that are very different from American films, from Japanese films, from French films. So I think it's important to note those differences and kind of explain them, but it's also important to recognize the similarities as well.
Can you tell us some distinct characteristics that you think Chinese cinema have?
Well, there's something in Hong Kong cinema that's kind of most confounding to American audiences when they first start watching a Hong Kong film, and that is the way it'll mix genres and tones, where you'll have just like kind of wacky slapstick comedy and then really heartfelt romance and then horribly bloody violence all within like a 20-minute span. That is total violation of Hollywood screenwriting rules, where a movie is supposed to be one thing. You can't be doing all of that at once because they think the audience will get confused. Whereas Hong Kong audiences are just used to that. They just roll with it. It's no big deal. And that's something as the more Hong Kong movies you watch, the more you get used to that, and it doesn't seem like a big deal to you anymore. But still, I will show somebody like a Stephen Chow is Journey to the West, Conquering the Demon is a really romantic movie. It's like a silly farce movie, but it's also like really like kind of deeply spiritual, almost maybe by accident. I don't know about Stephen Chow personally and his religious beliefs, but to me it plays like this really profound, deep movie about, kind of engaging with ideas at the core of Buddhism. And to have all of that in one movie by a famous comedian is not something you would ever see in Hollywood.